Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. It has finally arrived. Race Sim Studio have released Formula Hybrid 2022 for Assetto Corsa. This car has come to us quite late in the year. It's most typical that in their yearly iterations of Formula Hybrid, Race Sim Studio release Formula Hybrid to us in around late March, early April at worst case. Tends to coincide with either the end of winter testing or the first round of the championship. However, this year, winter testing and the first round of the championship, they came and went, and we had no Formula Hybrid release. Well, we had a couple of 2022 Type 2022-esque cars from Race Sim Studio in the past in the Formula Hybrid X series, the X car as well as the X Evo that we got later on in 2021. However, we didn't get the proper Formula Hybrid 2022. Why was this? Well, those of you who have any semblance of any awareness of world events will certainly know that we have got war in Europe right now. Race Sim Studio has been profoundly impacted by the ongoing war in Ukraine. Thus, one very high-profile member of the team had to flee his home with his family and with few possessions and seek asylum. Some of the possessions that he managed to take with him were the models and other assets for Formula Hybrid 2022. Finding a new home base to work from, Formula Hybrid 2022 got back on track, pun intended there, I suppose. And finally, it saw release in early July of this year. And here it is, we see it before us now. This car represents probably the most comprehensive, the most detailed, the most resource-hungry project that Race Sim Studio have ever released to the public. And according to Content Manager, we have 343 objects comprised of 566,784 triangles. This is certainly among the most highly detailed models, not just produced by Race Sim Studio, but produced for a consumer-level racing simulation, full stop. And it doesn't end there. There is so much to this car. And it also has a sibling, mind you. So I do need to say from the outset, in addition, of course, to saying, Race Sim Studio, thank you so much for the Herculean effort that went into creating this car amid circumstances that none of us ever hope would ever transpire, much less to us, but to anyone out there. They happened to you, and you still managed to create something truly wonderful for all of us, and we thank you for that. However, there is so much to this car, and there is so much to its sibling. Yes, we do have two Formula Hybrids this year. We have this version, which is the FH22 full stop, and then we also have an S trim. This video is only going to concern itself with Formula Hybrid 2022 full stop. There will be a second full-up review of the S trim of this car to come. So if you're looking for the S trim, you're not going to find it in this video. However, there is so much on both of these cars that I feel that they each warrant their own separate reviews. That's how detailed this project is. That's how much work went into this project. In a conversation that I managed to have with that lead modeler from Race Sim Studio, we're talking about 3,000 to 4,000 combined man-hours going into this one single project. And remember, Race Sim Studio have produced a Formula Hybrid for us every year since 2017. And each one of them is a halo project, something that they want to represent their best abilities in terms of their capabilities in working with the software, their capabilities in terms of their ability to create, to innovate, and to exploit the game engine. They want the Formula Hybrid series to be the absolute best that they possibly could produce in a given year. That's the level of commitment, and that's the level of craftsmanship and workmanship that has gone into this car. That being said from the outset, what is this car? Well, it is basically a 2022 spec Formula One car. However, it is not a Ferrari, it is not a Red Bull, it is not a Mercedes, it is not a Williams, it is none of the cars that you will see on the current Formula One grid. Why is that? Well, Race Sim Studio in recent years, in particular when speaking about the Formula Hybrid project, they have started to think of themselves as Formula One's 11th team, meaning that if they were to field an entry into the Formula One World Championship, they want Formula Hybrid to represent what they would field if they had to form up on a grid and start a Grand Prix. This car, therefore, is an original, ground-up design based on the rulebook. Literally, Racing Studio have taken the 2022 Formula One technical regulations. They have read them cover to cover many a time. They have parsed them cover to cover many a time. They've looked at where the bounding boxes are in terms of where you can and cannot put components, and they've complied with that to millimetric precision on every surface of this car. Every suspension element, every wheel hub, every flick up and flow modifier, every curve and strake in the floor that we'll be taking a look at later on, it all complies with the technical regulations 100%. For example, in a conversation that I had with Racing Studio, we were talking about the maximum wheelbase permitted in the regulations. It's 3,600 millimeters. The wheelbase on this car is 3,599 millimeters. And why is that? Because if you change the camber or toe settings, you might gain or lose a millimeter here and there. So no matter what you do with the setup, the car is still race legal according to the FIA technical regulations for the Formula One World Championship. And it doesn't stop there, but I digress. What is the car? What is its presence like? Why is it cool? And why are we looking at it here in the showroom? Well, it is, as we said, it's a 2022 spec Formula One type car. It is not a Formula One car in the sense that it is not trying to emulate any one of the real world Formula One cars. However, it is one that is entirely legal under the FIA technical regulations and would be eligible to race in Formula One if it could actually be built in the real world. What is Formula One doing these days? Well, we have got turbo hybrid cars, and we have done since 2014 with the introduction of the current 1.6 liter V6 internal combustion engines, which is what this car has. Powering this thing just behind the cockpit there is a 1.6 liter V6 at a 90-degree bank angle, mounted longitudinally there, a stressed member holding the car together, forming the structural bridge between the monocoque where the driver sits, the fuel tank, and the gearbox and rear axle out the back. Stressed member construction going all the way back to the 1960s with Colin Chapman and Lotus, still doing it today, and of course, Formula Hybrid is doing it here for us in Assetto Corsa. The hybrid part of Formula Hybrid comes in with a hybrid system that we've got on this car. Just as Formula One has, and again has had since 2014, we have got two primary hybrid power units in this car. We have one that is run off of the rear axle, that harvests energy that would otherwise be wasted under braking and sends it into a battery pack where it can be stored and then discharged later out through the gearbox to give a little bit of a power boost to the car. Really, you see that in acceleration, and the sorts of acceleration figures that you get on this car are pretty ridiculous when you really put it into party mode. The car also has a secondary hybrid system run off of the turbocharger on that V6 engine. All the Formula One engines, they are just single turbo engines, which is quite unique in the realm of V-block engines, because you've got two banks of cylinders, 3 each in this case, and it makes sense that because you've got two sets of exhaust primaries, you would put a turbocharger, at least one, on each bank of cylinders, much like IndyCar does with their V6 engine. But no, Formula One does a 6-into-1 pipe, and they run all of that exhaust into a single turbine. The secondary hybrid system runs off of that single turbine, and that is called Motor Generator Unit H. The one that runs off of the rear axle is called Motor Generator Unit Kinetic. The MGU H, as it's more commonly called, that takes energy that is created inside the spinning turbocharger, so we're taking the angular momentum of the rotation of the turbine, and we're charging a battery with that as well, where we can then either use that as a power boost to the rear axle through the gearbox, or we can use it to spin up the turbocharger, because a single turbocharger on a V6 engine, you're going to get a lot of turbo lag. Think of 1980s Formula One, for example, where the drivers would pin the throttle, count to 3, and then hold on. No turbo lag here. We have got the ability, via a secondary electric motor on the turbocharger, to spin it up before we even get back into the throttle, which means that when the driver commands for power, he's got it. So no turbo lag, and that is all thanks to the hybrid system. Couple that with the MGU-K, and you've got yourself 980 horsepower coming out of the back of this car. V6s are also pretty well known for torque, particularly in turbocharged applications. This car has got torque as well, 575 Newton meters worth. That's quite a lot. Plenty enough to spin up that rear axle despite having these really big, slick tires across all four corners of the car. So be careful on your throttle. Power to weight ratio, though, it means that we have got 0.82 kilograms per horsepower. Formula One cars, they've definitely gotten a bit heavier over the years. However, we still have a greater than 1-to-1 power to weight ratio, which means, yeah, hold on tight. You have got yourself quite a bit of performance potential here. The wheelbase, as we mentioned, 3,599 millimeters. The wheelbase, that is from wheel hub to wheel hub, front to rear. Our front track, which is the width of the car between wheel hubs in the front axle area here, as you can see, 1,618 millimeters. And in the rear, our track is 1,546 millimeters, so slightly wider in front than it is in rear. However, these are all things that are effectively stipulated in the technical regulations. Therefore, RaceSim Studio has had to comply with all of that. However, legal mumbo-jumbo aside, let's just take a look at this thing. As the car rotates before us here, just have a look at the intricacies in this front end, the front wing section there. The technical regulations, they also stipulate a maximum of 4 closed elements in the front wing. And what do we have here? Well, we've got a main plane there, which is the lowest section you can see. And then we've got 1, 2, 3 flaps. That's 4 closed elements on that front wing, and therefore we comply. The end fences here on the front wing as well. We have got these little vortex generators, these little louvers along the side. They're stipulated in the regulations, and they're there as well. Dive planes along the end fences across the very unique upturned end fence that we have this year, new for Formula One. They're also stipulated in the technical regulations in terms of where they can be and what size they can be. They're all there. We've got flap adjusters present here. We have got camber mounts along the sides of the nose mounted here. They're all stipulated in the regulations, and they're all here. Yeah. Double wishbone pushrod suspension across the front end of the monocoque. All the Formula One teams still running this arrangement. There was a time in the mid-2010s where we had some experimentation with pull rod arrangements, and they've decided better of that. So push rod, double wishbone setups across all of the Formula One cars, and therefore we've got one here on RaceSim Studio's interpretation as well. Big brake ducts as well to funnel air into those front brakes. And of course, we also, for this year, have these little wheel shrouds, winglets, duct winglets, whatever you really want to call these. They're here on Formula Hybrid. And this also leads me into a segue of why this car is actually race legal per the technical regulations. Not only is it dimensionally compliant, however, in Formula One, and you'll remember this from 2020 when we had, what was it? Were they called Force India at that time? No, they were called Force Canada Racing Dot. Yes, Racing Point. They copied the 2019 Mercedes car, and the FIA were able to get them. They didn't get them as much as they really could have done, but they were able to get them on a technical infringement with regard to listed and unlisted parts. And this is basically a list of components that teams are allowed to buy intact and complete from other manufacturers in terms of other competitors in the World Championship. That list of listed parts has gotten even longer for 2022. Some of the parts included on those listed parts lists are things like camera mounts and these wheel fairings, as we can see here. The wheel fairings first. Formula One, of course, is a constructors' championship. Yes, everybody talks about how Max Verstappen is currently the world champion on the driver's side. However, Formula One is a battle of technical prowess between all of the teams. One of the things that makes Formula One unique in the racing world is that every competitor is also a constructor, in that they design, manufacture, and operate race cars of their own design. However, despite Formula One being very proud of being a constructors' championship, there are a great number of standardized parts now seen on these 2022 cars in particular. 2022 regulations, we had a lot to do talking about overtaking and dirty air and turbulence and all kinds of things like that. So, one of the reasons that the cars look radically different in 2022 versus 2020 and 2021 is that the FIA said we need to make it easier for these guys to follow each other closely through high-speed corners. It was found that one of the reasons that they could not do that in the past was due to this thing called dirty air. Basically, it's the turbulence coming off of a car in front of you. It spoils the airflow over your own car. It creates turbulences, creates lift, all kinds of things. Basically, it makes your car work worse than if it were in clean air. Okay, so it makes it hard to follow through high-speed corners, and Formula One cars do all their bidding in high-speed corners, which means if you can't follow somebody, you're not going to be able to be in a position even to attempt an overtake, much less get the job done. So prescriptive design has really come into Formula One these days, and one of those prescriptions is these wheel fairings right here. Believe it or not, despite how intricate these designs are, and they are absolutely beautiful. They have got so many different surfaces. There is not a single straight line anywhere on them. You've got this little scoop down here, which is going to be working in conjunction with the intakes on the bottom of the floor. You've got the other little scoop here, which is designed to help extract air around the wheel to control the in-wash and outwash effect that we also heard a lot about in 2020. And then up here, we're trying to smooth out the turbulence over the spinning wheel and tire assembly, which is also not that great for turbulence in the air that's coming off of the car. However, all of these wheel fairings are identical on all Formula One cars because they're all made by one supplier, and then they are put into the championship as a listed part, which means that the teams don't manufacture these. I suppose they could if they wanted, but they absolutely must use this specification and only this specification, which means that there can be no variability in this geometry whatsoever. It has to be this size. The strakes in them have to be like you see them right here in terms of their angles and their width and where they are in this piece of carbon. They've all got to be right there as you see them. There can be no variability. And all of this is part of those technical regulations trying to help the cars follow each other more closely through high-speed corners. We've seen in 11 races now in the 2022 World Championship, have the regulations worked? There have certainly been times that I feel that they have, and then there have been other times where I feel they haven't made much of a difference at all. But there are more variabilities in terms of a race performance than simply aerodynamics in big macrocosmic terms anyway. However, one of those listed parts, these wheel fairings, they're here on the Formula Hybrid, as they should be. Moving rearward on the car here, here's where the engineers really do start to get to play, though. We've got listed parts here on the front axle in terms of those wheel fairings, but that ends immediately as you start to get into the front of the monocoque. Yes, there are dimensional constraints that must be complied with in terms of the cockpit surround and things like that. The cockpit opening has to be a certain size. The geometry of the cockpit opening has to be a certain way with minimum and maximum degrees of curvature that are permitted and things like that. However, the engineers start to play outboard of that quite a lot. You can see something right here, which is very unique. These mirrors, well, they're mirrors. Pretty much every car in existence has mirrors, usually more than one, and they help you see what's behind you. All right, nothing too special there. However, have a look at what Racing Studios' design is on these mirror stalks, right? We've seen the teams use the mirror stalks and mirror fairings for an aerodynamic benefit before. I remember seeing things like this, these little eyebrow winglets over the mirror fairings in 2017, looking at cars like the Ferrari and the Mercedes, and I thought, hey, that's a pretty cool design, and obviously the teams are still doing it now. However, if we look at the mirror stalk, you can see this little winglet right here, just on the side of the monocoque. We see this in the real world. Mercedes in particular are running a winglet that looks very much like this. However, the Mercedes solution is standalone. It's just a winglet. There's nothing attached to it. Racing Studio took a look at the technical regulations and realized, you don't have to have that a standalone piece if you don't want. Why don't we use it for something? And they use it to help support one of the wing mirrors. And of course, on the other side of the car, you have got the complementary structure right here. Utterly unique design. Something that I would not have thought to do, but apparently it's legal, and apparently it works. In addition, you can see these cascade elements down here, just below the mirror. These are also similar to things that we're seeing on the Ferrari and on the Red Bull this year, but again, Racing Studio designing to incorporate things like that in their car as well. And in addition, you can see these two cuts in particular. This one is a shut line to deal with a panel gap, but these two cuts, why are they here? They don't serve any purpose aerodynamically. You would actually want this cross-section to be contiguous all the way through, because any gaps that you introduce here are opportunities for vortices to form, and that's unwanted turbulence. But these gaps are here because the technical regulations stipulate that you can't have a contiguous surface in this area of the car longer than X millimeters. I have to pull them out to tell you specifically. But this section of the car in Race Sim Studio's design violates that provision of the technical regulations without these cuts. So these cuts are there to make sure that this car complies with the technical regs. That's the amount of detail that we're talking about here. These two little cuts probably did not take them very much time to do, and to be honest with you, you're not going to notice them. But they're there because they have to be if the car is going to be legal. And it is. Moving back down here, though, one of the major differences between a 2022 spec car and 2021 and prior: barge boards. In this section of the car here, at the bottom of the front end of the monocoque, we used to see these big, flat panels of carbon that were aerodynamically sculpted to send air down through the flanks of the car along the outer edge of the floor. They were called barge boards. They're no longer here, and they're no longer here partially due to something that was called outwash. As we mentioned before with the wheel fairings, the outwash was something that the engineers were doing to try and cut down on the drag that the cars were producing. They wanted to get all of this high-pressure air out of the car as much as possible, which meant that they just flung it out of the front end and they just let it fall behind in the car's wake. Great if you're just alone out on track, but if you're trying to follow somebody to set up an overtake, you might get some turbulence from that. So the FIA say no more to barge boards. What we have in place of barge boards, though, big intakes here. What's this for? Well, if we follow them, you're going to see that we are feeding, yes, the floor. The elephant in the room that I have not mentioned yet: ground effect. Yes, 2022 Formula 1 is a ground effect formula, meaning that we are using the bottom side of the car, the floor area, to generate the vast majority of our downforce. And ground effect works on Bernoulli's principle, which means that as you have a fluid flow, in this case air, that is channeled through a gap, the smaller that gap becomes, the faster the flow must become in order to maintain a given flow rate for a given volume. Meaning that basically the faster the air goes, the faster you go through the air rather, if the air doesn't speed up, you're going to have problems. You're going to stall out your floor in this case, your wing, whatever it may be, and it's not going to be an effective aero device. The other part of that principle, though, means that as the speed of a fluid flow increases, if it's impinging along an adjacent surface, for example, the bottom of the floor of this car would be an adjacent surface to a slug of air going through it, just as we are right now, okay? Yep. We were all slugs for a moment. Did you like that? Anyway, the pressure drops that we're exerting across an adjacent surface. When we lower the relative ambient pressure of a given enclosed space, the relative ambient pressure of the atmosphere outside of that enclosed space is now greater, which means that relative to outside air, our pressure is lower, which means that we create suction. That's our downforce, okay? That air, after it's funneled through the floor, through these strakes and through these tunnels down the side of the car, it is exhausted out the back through this part that we do see on all of the cars, this absolutely enormous diffuser, right? What we're doing here is, as we accelerate the airflow, again, as the speed of the flow of the fluid increases, our pressure along an adjacent surface drops, which means we create downforce because atmospheric pressure is higher than the pressure under the car, so, you know, the weight of the air gets bigger, relatively speaking, which pushes us into the tarmac. We accelerate the air further out the back of this diffuser, creating more downforce, and then it just spills out back into the atmosphere where it re-equalizes with ambient pressure. And all of that is being done with the floor these days, right? So as you can see, a lot of design work has to be done to optimize the way that the floor works on these cars in order to get the maximum benefit that you can find aerodynamically. But as you can see here, RaceSim Studio have absolutely modeled everything under the floor. It's not so easy to see everything. We're sort of morphing through the ground now, but you can see that we do have some things going on with the floor in terms of stays and flow modifiers and all sorts of stuff. Contrast is not great because we are underneath the darkest of shadows, but you can see that we've got a floor modeled. We, in addition, have a legality plank modeled, which is really, really cool. And I also happen to know on very good authority that the legality plank here is actually based on the Ferrari F175. And that's all I'll say about that. But believe me, some research has really been done in terms of even the modeling of things that you're not supposed to see on this car. And that's one of them. And it's absolutely legitimate. I will definitely vouch for that. Along the external flank of the car, though, we have got our side pod. Side pod design is also something that was a little bit of an unknown moving into 2022. We've seen some interesting side pods in the past. I remember in 2011, McLaren on the MP426, they had basically an inverted U-channel built into their side pods, trying to entrain air along the top side of the side pods to feed the diffuser that way. However, in 2022, there have been divergent designs, divergent interpretations of what the teams feel is optimum for trying to affect aero benefits and trying to affect downforce generation. The most radical one by far is Mercedes, who have effectively taken the size 0 concept and they have turned it up to 11. The Mercedes effectively doesn't have side pods. The only thing on the Mercedes is they have got the lateral crash test structure, which is basically the radiator inlet that you can see here. That's homologated. That must be on all the cars because it helps the driver in the event of a side-on impact. However, beyond that, they have effectively deleted their side pods. Now, RaceSim Studio have not decided to go quite that radical in their interpretation, but we do have pretty thin and svelte side pods on this car, which you can see yields a lot of free floor space to play with as we move down toward the top side of the diffuser. Now, in years gone by, the cars were a lot more open in this section, and they were also a lot flatter. You wouldn't have an upturn in the diffuser until you got to about this point on a car. Nowadays, you can see that the center part of the diffuser integrates perfectly into the trailing face of the side pods, and this is the central tunnel of the diffuser right here, as you can see, and it comes down and feeds into the floor again. There's a starter hole, by the way. Something else that's been modeled on this car that you're never going to see. But you can see a little bit of a carryover of that design from yesteryear here. The teams did like to keep free floor space in this area just to try and energize the diffuser flow, and we're still doing that here because, as you can see, as air is entrained from the upper side of the floor intakes here, it's going to attach itself along the edge of the side pod, and then it's going to vent right here through this little gap, and it's going to merge with the air that is flowing out from underneath the car. So you are kind of blowing the diffuser in this area here just by ambient air and the speed that it's moving through the car, but it's a negligible benefit, I would say. But again, in Formula One, thousands of seconds count. So if there is any sort of advantage to be gained here, you better believe the teams are going to do it, and therefore RaceSim Studio have also done it. But just to pull back a little bit and move away from some of the technicalities, just look at the shapes. These are all modeled by hand, right? It's all custom made. It's all been drawn up and then put into a 3D CAD program, and then put into Assetto Corsa, and it's been worked through computational fluid dynamics, and it's made its way onto the finished car. Obviously, these are vortex generators. We're trying to, again, steer this air that is moving along the flank of the car. We're trying to steer it to remain attached, so that's what these vortices are doing here. But it's all done. They could have made this a flat plane and left it alone and probably saved about 50 hours. But they didn't do that. They wanted to make this something beautiful, and they really succeeded. Absolutely, they did. Another thing on the rear of the car that I do want to mention. These winglets right here, these are sort of analogous to the wheel fairings that are on the front end of the car, and you can see that we do have a little bit more of a wheel fairing slash brake duct area here on the rear axle as well. But these winglets in particular, these are on the trailing inboard side of the brake duct, just after the wheel hub area. What are these? These are little winglets, yes. They were a little bit controversial, though, going back to 2017, 2018, because the teams were really exploiting these for more aerodynamic benefit right at the rear axle where you want all of the downforce to help the drivers get the power down through more slower speed corners. And the FIA, they slowly clamped them down from 2018, 2019, and then through 2021. I remember that there were big changes made to the number of winglets and the sizes of everything that you could have in this area. And a lot of that's been carried over to 2022. However, for 2022, guess what? These have also become one of those listed parts, meaning that the teams buy these from a supplier and they fit them onto the car. The teams have a little bit of leeway with something like this, though, relative to the front axle ones where they have no leeway whatsoever. They are able to control the number of these step planes that you can see in here. I believe the maximum is 4. You see Race Sim Studio going for 3, which is an entirely valid design. And that's effectively it. There's a legality box for this section as well in terms of where you can and cannot put anything. But that's it. These are a listed part. They're standardized. They are on all of the Formula One cars in some shape, manner, or form. Again, there will be slight differences between the teams in this particular area, but they're a listed part. They're mandatory. The cars must run them, and they're on a Formula Hybrid as well. Another mandatory listed part, this rear crash structure. Have a look. Notice anything different about this particular version of the rear crash structure this year? Well, we have got ourselves these curved areas along the outboard sides of what is the rain light. A little bit different. It's something that we haven't really seen before, and it is been mandated from 2022 on. Why has it been mandated? I'm not entirely sure. I think it has something to do with the proclivity of the front end of a car to embed itself into this rear crash structure in the event of a rear end collision here. Basically something into the first corner on lap 1, somebody nuzzles the guy in front, and maybe he can become embedded into the back of the car, and it just creates a bigger accident into something that doesn't need to be exacerbated. So the fairing that surrounds this rear crash structure and the rain light has now been mandatorily made curved. Race Sim Studio have duly followed course and made theirs curved. Additionally, across the top here, we have got these two little pipes. I think, and I'm probably wrong, but I think that these are part of the breather system on the engine. The smaller pipe certainly is. I think that's an overflow for the radiators, because on some shots, particularly on the Ferrari, we have seen what appears to be steam coming out of the very rear of the car right here, and I think that is an overflow for the coolant system. Remember, the radiators and coolant system on any combustion engine, it's a pressurized system, and whether you're using an ethylene glycol based solution or just straight up distilled water, it's pressurized because of the temperature differential. So you need to vent some of that excess pressure. I think this is where they're doing it, at least on the Ferrari and probably on a lot of the other cars as well. Race Sim Studio is deciding to put that sort of system on this car as well. Very cool. Moving up, you can see our rear wing, obviously, but in addition to what we have got on the rear wing, we have also got this little beam wing right here. Don't call it a beam wing. The FIA gets a little bit sensitive about things like that, but it's a beam wing, let's be honest. And it is homologated. The beam wing itself, in terms of its design, is not quite homologated, but you'll notice something. You see the exhaust right here? And you see the gap underneath the exhaust pipe relative to the top of the uppermost element of the beam wing. This gap right there is 10 millimeters. Because the technical regulations say that it has to be 10 millimeters. Why are we talking about a 1 centimeter gap? Because according to the FIA, they need 1 millimeter minimum clearance between that beam wing and the exhaust pipe, because metal expands when it gets hot. And of course, when it's directly connected to a 900 horsepower power unit here, it's going to move a little bit. So you want that wiggle room to allow for the thermal expansion of the metal and as well for vibration tolerance, right? Because if you just had that, first of all, carbon is not very good at resisting flame or resisting high heat. So if you just have this really hot pipe directly impinging on the carbon, you're going to start to get structural issues pretty quickly. But beyond that, you don't want to constrict the movement of your exhaust pipe either, because anybody who's ever flown on an airplane has seen the wings with the uplift, and particularly if you've gone through turbulence and you see the wings are flapping around a little bit. That's there because you need to dissipate structural stresses before something breaks. Same thing right here. You must have that gap. That's a homologated gap. You can make it a bigger gap if you want, but it can't be any smaller than that. Again, the FIA, in their infinite wisdom, and in this case I agree with it, have said it must be there. Therefore, Race Sim Studio has put it there. Something else that Race Sim Studio have put there. You can see that we actually do have two exhaust pipes on this car. The larger one, obviously for the turbine exhaust, but we've got a smaller one over top. That's for our wastegate. On previous iterations of Formula Hybrid, though, you would see this upper pipe going all the way out and terminating right where the primary exhaust does. Why does this one not? Well, again, the technical regulations have said that you can't do that. It's a little bit dark in there for us to see right now, but the technical regulations this year have said that you cannot exhaust your wastegate anywhere other than the primary exhaust, which means that they have to merge at some point, and they therefore have chosen to merge them right here. This means, once again, that we're talking about something that is entirely race legal. Some of the ramifications, though, of this decision, you'll notice particularly on a lot of the onboard shots where the FOM, when they run their onboard cameras, they usually have a microphone that's placed around the exhaust. You don't hear that quite as shrilly anymore because the wastegate carried a lot of that sound. Now that they're all merging into the same pipe, you're getting destructive interference and it's canceling out a lot of the engine sound, which is a shame, but they've done it, and therefore it's on this car. Speaking of onboard cameras, we've got a menagerie of them here. First of all, the T-bar roll hoop camera. This is one of the stereotypically awesome views that we get from all of the cars, and all of the Formula One cars nowadays now carry cameras, usually at least 3 per car. One of the places they carry camera is right here. This camera, in terms of how it's been modeled, and it's actually been modeled in 2 pieces as well, this is also entirely race legal. Race Sim Studio went to the supplier, the manufacturer of these cameras. There is a company that makes these cameras and only these cameras for the Formula One World Championship. They contacted that company and they said, would you mind awfully if we use some of your resources because we're trying to make this Formula Hybrid thing? And they said, sure, we'll do that. And here it is. This is 1-to-1, millimetrically correct, the camera that is mounted on top of the roll structure of every 2022 Formula One car. You can see that we have got the camera here with the little lens, and then the trailing edge right there. Of course, they've tried to sculpt these aerodynamically so that they don't create too much drag on the cars, but again, I am sure that if the engineers had any choice in the matter, they wouldn't want to run it at all because it's just an extra couple of grams that you don't need on the car. But it's there, and because it's there, it's been modeled, and it's been modeled absolutely perfectly. There's a rear-facing camera as well that gives us those over-the-shoulder rear shots. Very nicely done. Additionally, you get these camera mounts here on either side of the nose. I believe we are talking about blanks right here, at least here on the right side of the car, but these are also homologated, made by that same supplier. They're here as well on Formula Hybrid 2022. These both are blanks at the moment, I do believe, but see, I'm not entirely sure if that's a camera lens or if that's a fastener head, but either way, they're there. One additional camera mounting here on this car, right here on the side of the roll structure. This is the facing forward over the shoulder shot that we get quite often during race coverage. I don't really like to watch onboards from this vantage point personally, but it's here, and again, a homologated camera mounting position. Very cool. And you can see on this side where the same camera can be mounted depending on the direction of the circuit. In addition to all of that, what else do we have? We have got the top side of this monocoque with another camera. This is the 3 D360 camera that is also on all of the cars. You don't see this too often in the live coverage, but a lot of the onboard footage that FOM publish on their YouTube channel and elsewhere, you do see views from this 360 camera. This 360 camera is also very important in terms of safety, because the FIA, when a car has a big accident, they want to review as much footage as possible from the car involved. So they will be looking from the footage from this camera to see what happened. They'll be looking particularly to see how the driver's head moved around, if there was a big impact. May they suspect any other type of injury, depending on, was he holding the wheel? Did his hand or his arm get flung someplace in some direction if he rolled? They're looking at data from this camera as well, which is really cool. Additionally, they are also looking at data from this camera. This camera right here is shooting at about 500 frames per second, I do believe. And this is also helping out tremendously with accident investigation. Again, they want to see how the driver reacted to a big impact. Are there injuries? How did the equipment perform? Do we need to take a look at cockpit safety? Things like that. That's what's important from this camera. You also see this camera from broadcasts from time to time, shooting at probably 60 frames per second for that, but it's recording at 60 and 500 frames per second. So that's something that's very, very useful for the FIA as they continue to try to make these cars safer. Additionally to that, you will see on the center stage of Halo, what do we got here? Hashtag no to war. Of course, we talked off the top about this car's gestation and the big world event that disrupted that. RaceSim Studio making their stand known loud and clear right here on the front end of Formula Hybrid 2022. Additionally, finally, taking a look at the cockpit. Cockpit surround, this is obviously a homologated part as well, one of those listed parts. This whole area, this is a collar that removes from the inside of the monocoque, as you can see. And often you'll see the drivers removing this material before they get out of the car because it does constrict the cockpit opening. But it does that because this is actually a soft material. It's designed to be soft because if a driver gets into particularly a lateral impact, his head and his helmet are going to smash into the side of the cockpit, and you want him to hit something soft. So that's what that something soft to hit is, this cockpit surround, this collar right here. It's made of a crushable foam structure. The side bolsters, they're more of a memory foam, so if you have a memory foam pillow or a memory foam mattress, you actually have something which is quite similar to a part of a Formula One car. So when you go to bed tonight, remember that. But beyond that, this is also temperature sensitive foam, so the teams will have different specifications of all of this, which means that if it's warmer, if it's cooler, humidity levels, whatever, they will run different specifications of foam to match the weather conditions. And the reason for that is, in addition to being a little bit of a bolster for the drivers through high-speed corners, really long, hot day, these guys are elite athletes, yes, but they might just want to rest their head through a couple of corners. It's something soft for them to rest their head on. But the big purpose of this is energy absorption in the event of a big impact. So they want to make sure that they have optimized the running conditions for the foam, which means that they have multiple specifications and all kinds of things that they need to take into consideration before they allow these cars on track. And that's part of how they keep these guys safe. In the cockpit itself, though, what have we here? We have got a lot. We've got, first of all, our steering wheel. This is our Rexing steering wheel. For the second year in a row, this is the second time that we have got a Rexing steering wheel on a Formula Hybrid. They made their debut on Formula Hybrid 2021. Very nice steering wheel, and it is very heavily based on, and I believe it is actually a millimetrically precise reproduction of a steering wheel that you can actually buy for your sim rig at home. So Rexing, obviously, being a partner with RaceSim Studio, putting their products on their products, and it's a cool steering wheel. Obviously, the car is not alive right now, but when it is alive, we're going to get all sorts of information on this steering wheel, and you'll see all of that in due course. But in addition to being a real-world product that you can get, RaceSim Studio have decided to reproduce it faithfully, all the way down to the paddles on the back for your gear shift, and down below for your clutch actuation, the quick release for the release from the steering column, as you can see, the carbon texturing, the upper auxiliary paddles here for all sorts of multifunction switches and things. A lot of drivers like to map DRS to these paddles, and it's here quite obviously. And it's all wrapped in carbon fiber, which looks absolutely amazing. It's great to see all of that. And also on the back of this steering wheel, Race Sim Studio logo, number 47, and then somebody's name. I have no idea who that is. Also, you can see that name on the sides of the cockpits around here, these little flick-ups trailing the cockpit edge. Obviously, Race Sim Studio here being very gracious once again, putting my name on this car, in addition to the names of other server boosters on their Discord. They put out the tender, hey, do you want to be on Formula Hybrid? And 20 people said yes, and I was one of them. So thank you very much once again for being considerate to not just put my name on the car, but to put a lot of people's names on the car. It does actually mean a lot to me as a long-standing fan of yours to have my name on multiple cars now of this point, and it's cool. And I know that the other members of the community greatly appreciate that, and we thank you for that. But moving down through the cockpit once again, what do we have? We've got the seat, quite obviously. Take a better look at the seat from above. Seat belts, RSS, with the little pads that go on the seat belts. We've got the buckles on the seat belts with compliance stickers. RSS, valid from 2022. Yup, cool. Race Sim Studio logo on the straps. No stone is left unturned, never ever. These electrical lines connecting all sorts of things in the car. Pedals. Over here, got a little lever, probably for adjusting brake bias, or for some sort of adjustment is there. We've got a battery switch, which I believe is here. Yep, all sorts of things. More switches, mode resets. That's probably our main ignition. Pull tabs for removal of that cockpit surround. And then right here. You know, for all of the absolutely fantastic things that you see on these cars over the years, the thing is, this is my favorite detail. The chassis plates. Race Sim Studio RSS 2022 season car 22 chassis V6 number 8-22. Fantastic stuff. And then the chassis plate proper, Formula Hybrid 2022, RSS 008 2022, certification year 2022, Domi Racing Systems. That's an allusion to the physics lead from Race Sim Studio. And then what else do we have? Fine print. Yeah, that's an address, just in terms of who made this. Very cool. Very, very cool. And then down here you got the pedals. These are some of the more detailed pedals we've seen on a Race Sim Studio car in quite some time. And the reason for that is they're animated. The driver is animated on this car. We've seen that on a couple other cars in Assetto Corsa, and we're seeing it in iRacing now, natively supported as well. But I believe this is the first time Race Sim Studio have animated pedals and the driver leg motion. It's here, and it's really cool. And there's even some 3D modeling behind the pedals here. The brake master cylinder, the brake lines, and then the electronic lines for the fly-by-wire throttle actuation. That's cool. And then the front of the monocoque right there. Yeah, this is the front. You can't go further than this, because then you morph out into the world. So very, very cool to see all of this stuff. Coming out of the cockpit, down the air snorkel. It just gets dark in there really fast, but obviously the engine intake is there. Top side of the engine cover, kill switches for the marshals. That's really nice. Like all of that. Engine cover, proto shark fin still remains. DRS, the actuator is right here. And you can see the actuator actually works. A little hydraulic piston moving in and out to pull the wing flap up and down. The joints are articulated. And of course the flap itself is animated nice and smoothly. See the hydraulic slave cylinder going into there. Look at this carbon texture. It's astonishingly cool. And you're never going to get this close to see anything, but it's all there and it looks amazing. I love how everything is articulated in there. I mean, you can see the angle clearly change. and the vertex of that rotation is right into where the bolt goes through, which is exactly where it should be in reality. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Other visual things that you got on the car, there are a number of cockpit surround in terms of the little windscreen here. You can change that. There are a few of them. We'll go through those once we're out on track. You can add some winglets to the halo, which we'll show you out on track as well. The rear wing, it vibrates at speed, which is a very nice touch, in addition to obviously seeing the DRS articulate. And you also get the uppermost flap elements on the front wing flapping around with downforce. So it's ridiculously cool. Other behaviors that the car does, quite obviously, we got a high downforce race car here, but we also, if you get the setup just wrong, we also can get extremely severe porpoising on this car. And we'll show you how all of that works as well. I mean, a lot of people I've already heard have said, hey, this car doesn't porpoise, what's wrong with this? Bad car. No. You're just a bad guy at setup, because it will porpoise, and it will porpoise big time. So we will definitely talk about that. Last thing that I want to talk about, though, is just skins. You can see I've been showing you this skin right now. It's my number 47 skin. Again, very, very pleased to have gotten the chance to be on this car. But we've got a number of skins on this car. I'm showing you all the default ones it comes with. We've got an Aston Martin looking skin. We got an Alpine looking skin, a Ferrari looking skin. We go back the other way. Got the Haas looking skin, which mine is one of, and there's one other. We have got this one, which I suppose is kind of like an AlphaTauri looking skin or a Williams looking skin. I don't know. I gotta think about that a little bit. But we've got a number of skins on this car, and remember, we have got this car's stablemate, the S trim, which has more skins on it. So we do have, at least in terms of the colors and macrocosmic designs, we do have all of the Formula One cars represented here in terms of the liveries. Obviously, it's bespoke liveries in terms of sponsorship and things like that, but you've got a convincing enough looking grid as it stands right here between the two variants of Formula Hybrid 2022. However, we are almost 52 minutes into this video, and we're still in the showroom. I sincerely apologize, but also I don't, because there's so much here, and I don't feel like I've even scratched the surface on all of the things that are going on in this car, but I wanted to keep this part of the video under an hour, and we're there. So next, we got to take this thing out on track and show you how it drives. To Silverstone. Welcome to Silverstone. Before we get out on track, of course, a look through the setup screens to show you the menagerie of setup options available here on Formula Hybrid 2022. First of all, on the gear screen, what have we got? We have got 8 forward ratios in the box, plus reverse unlisted here, of course. However, we have fixed ratios in this car. Just like we have in the real world, the teams must declare their gear ratios before the start of the season, and then they are committed to them for the balance of the championship. So they are what they are. Obviously, this range has to be accommodating to all sorts of different types of circuits and weather conditions. So you can see our theoretical Vmax there of 369 kilometers per hour. That's assuming no rolling resistance and a vacuum. So obviously we're never quite going to see speeds that high. But places like Monza, for example, Mexico as well, Azerbaijan even, we can see speeds approaching 330, 340 clicks. So these cars are mighty fast in a straight line. And obviously you've got the gearing to accommodate that. Tire screen here. We've got tire compounds to choose from. Of course, we have got the default setup loaded up here, and it defaults to the C3 soft compound. However, we also have a medium compound, a hard compound, and a rain compound as well, for those of you who want to try to run in the wet with later CSP versions. However, going back down into the super soft C4 and the ultra soft C5. So C5 ultra soft, obviously this is going to be your fastest tire over 1 lap pace, but it's going to be the least durable. Conversely, going back to the hard C1 compound, this is going to be your slowest compound, however the most durable. So your race strategy is going to dictate which tire compounds you will utilize. Default setup though brings us to the soft C3 compound, which we will remain on. Fuel, we are zeroed out here to keep the engine quiet. However, maximum fuel capacity on FH22 is 148 liters, as you can see there.
Electronics, here's where we start to play with the hybrid system on the car. Obviously, we have got the Formula One hybrid system here with the MGU-K and the MGU-H. Defaults to balanced here, which is the mode that you basically want to be running in most of the time because it is, well, balanced in terms of duration to have you have the boost over the entire course of a single lap of most circuits, but also to give you usable boost as well. We can also cycle this down into low, build, and no deploy mode. So your no deploy mode is turning the system completely off in terms of deployment. Build will deploy a little bit, but still is going to harvest more than it deploys. Low, you're basically 50-50 in terms of harvest and deployment. Balance, you've got usable deployment. You also have harvest going on, but you have more deployment than harvesting at this point. High is almost a party mode, and then attack is your ultimate party mode. This is not going to last you a full lapse duration at most circuits, so just be mindful of that. We'll go back to balanced. MGU-K recovery, this is effectively the second braking force on the rear axle in terms of how much of that brake energy is being converted into electrical power for the battery. Defaults to 50%. It can go all the way up to 100 if you'd like, or you can also completely turn that off and bring it to 0%. MGU-H, this is the motor generator unit run off of the turbocharger. You can tell it to send all of its power into the battery pack if you'd like, or you can tell it to turn that power back into motive power and send it into the battery pack where it's immediately sent through the gearbox for a little bit of a power boost. And, of course, engine braking. This is effectively telling the throttles how much are they hanging open when you're off the power, turning the engine into an air pump to help you slow down that way. Brakes. Brake bias and brake power defaults to 53% to the front. The range of adjustment is between 46% and 64%, so we'll bring that back to default 53. Brake power, this is just basically how much force is translated into braking, so how much braking force on the pedal actually goes to the calipers and clamps down on the discs. Drivetrain, differential adjustments here in power coast and preload default values shown here. Suspension alignment settings. So we've got a lot of suspension screens on this car. This is the first one, camber and toe on all four corners with default values shown. The second, main suspension screen. Here's where we're setting our wheel rates, ride heights, travel ranges, and the spring rates on the anti-roll bars there, front and rear, all four corners, as well as front and rear ARB reflected here. Dampers. Your fast and slow bound and rebound settings here for your corner dampers. So for your primary suspension attached to the wheels directly, default values shown. The heave springs here, these are your third springs. These are the springs that are mounted on top of the chassis in the front end and around the gearbox casing and the rear end. This is where you're controlling the car's vertical motion. This is a very critical screen on this car because your changes here are going to dictate how much of a degree of porpoising you get on this car. So that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to. Effectively, we're controlling bound and rebound vertically with the third springs here. It's very important here. Various steering assist, it's your power steering, force feedback, linearity. I never touched this, but you can play with that if you'd like. Visuals. We've got a lot of visual customization available to us on this car. Halo, we can, if we desire, hide the center stay of Halo right there, so you can have it a little bit more accessible field of view, I guess. I never like to do that, but it's there. Halo style. We can add two little winglets to Halo. If we go on board here, you might be able to see two little winglets just on either side that we can add or subtract from Halo if we want. Optional left, off, and right. What is this for? This is for the camera mount that is along the roll hoop on the car. Right here, you can see we can remove it completely. We can move it to the right side if we want. So a very nice degree of customization available there. I do like that immensely. Optional hot, cold. What's this? Well, you see the louvers here on the side pods. We go to cold, and they are deleted. So nice little touch there. Again, it's not something that's going to impact your performance, but it's something that you can change on the car, and we very much appreciate things like this. Off style A, B. What do we have here? This is the windscreen on the front end of the monocoque. Right now, we do not have a windscreen fitted. We go to style A, and we just have this very simple flick-up version here. And style B, we have a Haas-style, Mercedes-style, corrugated, jagged edge windscreen there for vortex generation, just to cut down on buffeting to the driver's helmet. Last thing here, tape on and off. What are we talking about with tape? We're talking about this right here. You see the shut lines between the panel gaps here? We can remove that tape across the shut lines if we want. The teams will run a very large amount of tape on their cars. It's not to keep the bodywork in place. It's all secured with quick-release fasteners in most cases, but it is to cut down on unnecessary aerodynamic parasitic drag, because the shut lines will not one-to-one meet up in all cases, so you want to smooth out any gaps that exist, and the teams use high-speed helicopter tape for that purpose. So you have that detail on a Formula Hybrid if you so choose to run it or not. Pit stop strategy is par for the course in Assetto Corsa. However, aerodynamics. One difference on Formula Hybrid 2022 that sets it apart from other previous editions of Formula Hybrid is that we don't have granular adjustments in terms of front to rear wings. So you don't have direct control over that in terms of the angle of attack of the wings, but you do have downforce level adjustments here. Defaults to high, it goes to medium, low, or very high. So again, we'll be running default setup here for our first run, but you can definitely see that, yes, you do have downforce adjustments with Formula Hybrid. It's done as a package deal, though, because the entire car is so sensitive to changes in angle of attack, not just of the wings, but of the whole car itself, because the whole underfloor is a wing on a car like this. So your front and rear wings don't have as much of an impact on your overall downforce generation as you might think, but the angle of attack on the floor does relative to the incoming air, as well as the ride height does. So that's part of the reason why the teams have struggled with that, particularly in the early part of the season. You want to run the ride height lower, so we talked about Bernoulli's principle to accelerate air through that gap between the bottom of the floor and the ground, but if you do it too low, you'll stall it out, the car will bottom, and then you get the porpoising oscillation. So that's part of the reason why we've got a package deal this time around on Formula Hybrid. However, going back to our default setup, there we go, 50 liters of fuel on board. I'm going to just take away our MGU recovery and deploy for the moment, and then I'm not going to touch anything else on these default setup here with our options. So we are now in the cockpit. The car is alive. We can go through some of the instrumentation that we see. Obviously, we are running. The engine is idling at 4,000 RPM, as you can see. That is in the upper center of the display there, the red 4,000. That's our crankshaft RPM. To the left of that, we have got our speed. We'll be reading out in kilometers per hour here. To the right of that, upper right, we've got the 50.0. That's our fuel level in liters. Below that, on the next line, from the left side, you can see tire pressures, 17, 17, 16, 16. That is right front, right rear, left rear there in the corresponding boxes. To the right of that, we have got our N there, gear position indicator. If we bring the clutch in and we start to upshift, there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then down through the box, back into neutral, and reverse. Gear position indicator, quick as you like. To the right of that, we have got our fuel usage per lap. Obviously not showing anything right now because we haven't turned a wheel yet this session. And then we have got ourselves below that. That is our turbo, not our turbo boost pressure. That is, I believe, our fuel delta. We'll have to confirm that. No, that's not. It's our session delta. Next line down to the left, we have our time of day. Just ticking to 10:13 at the moment. We have our race position in the center of that, currently 1, and will remain 1 because we're the only car on track. And then 100, that is, I believe, our allotted charge in the MGU battery. Again, we'll confirm that because you don't get the chance to see all of this instrumentation as often as you might think when you're driving. Below that, we have our lap counter, so lap 1 we're on right now, and then turbo boost pressure is the 00 right now. So we get into the throttle. See that we do start to build some turbo boost pressure, and that updates in real time. Finally, in the lower right, we have got clocks. So we've got our current lap time, just ticking past 11:28, and then below that, we will have our session best. So all of that's your instrumentation. In the cockpit itself, though, we have got great modeling inside here. Obviously, the steering wheel, that Rexing wheel, looks just like the real-world product that you can buy. But the rest of the cockpit, as we saw in showroom view, so much detail in here. It's in-game as well. It's not just a showroom special. There is so much to see in this car. Regardless, though, we're on default setup. We have got an empty Silverstone all to ourselves. Let's take a look at what this thing does on default setup. So, clutch in, first gear punched up, raise the revs, And we will let the clutch out. Up to the speed limit. And now coming on to the racetrack here at Silverstone in Formula Hybrid 2022. I have not had the tires in the blankets. This is actually something that's not recommended you do by RaceSim Studio. They say that you should have the tires in the blankets because obviously tire pressure is a function of tire temperature, and it's going to affect the ride height of the car. So the lower the ride height runs, in a nutshell, the more likely you are to bottom the floor, which then means you're more likely to get porpoising, which is actually detrimental to the car's performance. However, I'm expecting this. Therefore, we're going to build up some temperature in the tires and brakes before we really start to go for it. Test out DRS, that's working just fine. Let's give it some beans here. Still no hybrid deploy. It is something that we have seen quite a bit in 2022. The drivers taking 2, sometimes even 3 laps just to bring the car up to temperature. 18-inch tires this year, so they have slightly different heating curves in terms of where they like to be. Takes them a little bit longer to get into the sweet spot sometimes. Let's see how we are through Copse Corner. Yep, we are flat. To Maggots and Beckett's. Flat through the first 2 apices. Got a lift for the 3rd one. And the 4th one is always a lift and a bit of dab of a brake. DRS down hanger straight. Little short shifted to 8th. Brakes starting to feel like they are where I need them. Let's give us some MGU, shall we? Go into balance mode, which is effectively where you want to be for most of your running. On the steering wheel, now that the MGU system is alive, you will see we've got these 2 blue bars. On the left side, that is the master state of charge for the MGU battery pack. That's the big chunk of lithium-ion batteries underneath the fuel tank. That's how much electrical power is in the car. To the right, you have your per lap allotment of your MGU deploy. So you will see that that bar continues to tick down over the course of the lap versus the bar on the left. That one will fluctuate more as we go around because it's constantly charging and discharging. And yes, that is a lap delta now on the right side screen. The green numbers currently showing 1.27. Our first lap complete. What's the time? A 1:32.586, I believe. The car is fully up to temperature, and it feels like it is happy. What is it like to drive? Well, I will say first and foremost, my first run in this car, which unfortunately I wasn't able to document for you, but the first thing that really impressed me was the amount of sureness that the car shows, particularly on the front axle. You turn the wheel once, and the car is responding to your inputs pretty much as you would expect it to. The car is very, very pointy on this default setup, which I personally like an awful lot. I do drive the car off the front end to the point where the back end isn't quite as important to me. If it breaks free, I'm prepared to deal with that. But the front end has to be right. It has to reassure me that when I turn the wheel, it's going to follow my commands. And that is exactly what this front end is doing. It's so positive. It may well be the most positive, the most reassuring default setup on any Formula Hybrid. It's exactly what I want, and it's absolutely glorious because of that. It also meant that I haven't done a great deal of setup work on this car, apart from just trying to investigate how to break the setup, because I want to show that to you as well, because it's just doing what I need it to do pretty much from the word go. I'd like it to be a little bit more open on the rear, I suppose, but I can open up the differential and remedy that problem. But extremely positive on the front end. It's definitely something that's going to reward you. When you turn the wheel, the car just reacts. It does exactly what you think it should do. It's fantastic, and it feels absolutely fantastic as well. Force feedback here, it's going to depend greatly on your hardware and your settings configuration. However, here, through my TSPC wheelbase and the Ferrari SF1000 wheel rim, this feels absolutely tremendous. Other handling characteristics, we mentioned how positive it is on the front end. It also feels very positive on the rear, believe it or not. On default, it's not quite to my liking in terms of the amount of looseness that you get via the differential, but again, I can dial that in or out as I desire. It's going to feel just fine for you, but you don't feel the car trying to step out all over the place, at least on default setup. Of course, when you really do start to push it, it is going to protest a bit. But as we are right now, just running consistent times in the mid-132s here around Silverstone, it's absolutely fine, and that would be a respectable race pace. So, as the car is designed to run for longer durations with not ridiculously light fuel loads, it's going to perform just as you would expect them to perform based on what you've seen on television so far watching Formula One in 2022. And in these big braking zones, the brakes are also fantastic. Of course, it's a Formula One car with carbon pads and discs. Lots and lots of braking force. They can exceed 6G deceleration, depending on the corner that we're approaching and how fast we were going on approach to the corner. But they are incredibly powerful, and they are also incredibly communicative. They're pretty linear. There's no point in the pedal where you get this tremendous locking force. They're just linear, and they're very strong. Great feedback. You can modulate the pressure very nicely. Of course, that's going to change depending on your brake bias settings and your individual sim rig setup. But again, where I am here with the T3PA Pro pedals here from Thrustmaster, feels good. Feels really, really good. And speaking of pedals, the pedal cam that we got, courtesy of McLaren and Lando Norris from the British Grand Prix, kind of shows that perhaps some of us need to change our philosophies in terms of how we set up our sim rig pedals, because there's an awful lot of travel on that brake pedal. Regardless of that, how's the steering feel? How's the gearbox? How's the weight transfer? It's tremendous, absolutely tremendous, and it goes hand in hand with how pointy the car is on the front end. As you throw the weight around, as you're steering the car through various corners of different lengths and different tightness and different speeds, the way the weight shifts around. I mean, the car's heavy. These cars are weighing north of 790 kilos at the start of the race, for sure. They're heavy, but they handle their weight very nicely. It's not like they feel like steamships or something, lumbering through the North Atlantic in a storm. Yes, they're heavier than, say, the other variants of Formula Hybrid. They're heavier than the F13, the V8 car that Racing Studio have done. Certainly heavier than the F2000 V10 and the F90 V12. However, they're composed. They don't feel piggish. They feel like they're proper race cars, because they are proper race cars. And, you know, you're going to lose some of that agility in lower speed corners simply because you have more momentum to swing around. But where the car is really designed to be operating, medium to high speeds, feels good. Really does. A little bit of understeer setting in here as the tires are starting to wear in. But you can still get on the power pretty early. I like all of that. As you can see, not much wheel spin to deal with. Let's turn our MGU off. Charge a little bit. You can see there we got ourselves, how many laps? We got 7 laps. Well, we did a couple of warm-up laps. So we got 5 laps, let's say. We in our balanced mode without touching any of the other settings in terms of harvest or deploy, just at 100% recovery on the MGU-K. And it lasted quite a while, and it was consistent. So, not bad. Not bad at all. See here, we don't need 8th gear through the Maggots and Beckett's complex without the MGU deploy, though. So that 160 horsepower that you get from the hybrid system, without that, you notice a little bit of a straight line speed deficit. Let's really start to go for it here. Balanced mode, MGU-H to motor, so maximum power allocation out the rear axle now. A little bit of protest from the rear axle. .300 clicks. Up at launch to Woodcut corner. So great. We'll hold 7th here for Cops. Flat through Cops, no problem. 8th gear for Maggots and Beckett's. Still flat, a little bit wide of the apex there. Rolling back into the power over the bumps. DRS. .131.232. Very, very cool. And again, default setup, still with 25 liters in the tank on the C3 compound. So we still have 2 steps of tire compounds to go faster with. We can take fuel out to go faster with. There's proper pace in this car. over this kind of longish run. We're on lap 10 right now. The tires still feel absolutely fine. I feel like they could do at least another 10 laps without too much difficulty, probably longer. But absolutely great, consistent performance. Car is a very stable platform here on default setup. And again, you're doing respectable race pace right now. It's not the sort of car that's going to fatigue you. It's just going to give you what you give it very consistently. Back into the pit lane, you see the red and green lights flashing up there. That's just to show us that we are in the pit lane with the limiter active. Very, very nice. So there it is, our first run here, just on default setup. What was our lap time? There we go, 1:31.232. So, okay, respectable in terms of a race pace, perhaps. Toward the end of the race, you start to see times like that as we are lower on fuel now. But pretty good. On default setup, again, the first thing and still the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is just how responsive and positive the car is on the front axle. You turn the wheel and it's just bang, it's giving you what you want. There's no hunting around. There's no taking multiple bites at the cherry, as Martin Brundle might say. The car just responds as you want it to do, and it's so compliant. There's no fighting it so much here. I mean, if you get on the power too early out of a lower speed corner, yes, you are going to get the rear axle to protest as you get wheel spin. But beyond that, it's just so compliant. It's so docile and tractable, and it's just performance that's accessible. Again, it's probably the best default setup that we've gotten yet on a Formula Hybrid, and it's so approachable, and you can just have grip for days. It's really, really good. However, we do have to see what happens when we start to trim this thing out more in a qualifying trim. So let's take a look at what that's like. Right, so back into the pits with us. Our run on default setup. Obviously, the car very compliant and just easy speed for the most part on default setup. However, we have now loaded up something that would be more akin to a qualifying setup, particularly in terms of tire compound. We've gone for the Ultrasoft C5 tires here. I've also made a couple of changes there to our recovery settings here. It's going to default to 100% now on this setup. A little bit less engine braking as well. Otherwise, just the differential that I've opened up in Power Coast and Preload, and our suspension arrangements, a little bit of a drop in ride height that I want to do. Basically, we'll run the minimums there. So a little bit more downforce. However, on our heave springs, we're not really touching anything here. A little bit more in travel ranges, perhaps, just to give some compliance over some of the bumps, particularly heading into Stowe. But other than that, we're not going to touch anything. So we still should not see too much, if any, of the porpoising issue going on. In the cockpit, I am going to add a little bit of a windscreen there, just for some dramatic effect. But other than that, not really going to change much. So we are once again in the cockpit, and we're just going to go back and set up our instrumentation in terms of showing you the pedals. There we go. And of course, we need to put some gas on board. So this is going to be a low fuel qualifying type run. So we're going to put in 18 liters to start. And we're just going to go for it and see what it does. We were running in the mid 132s last run. We're going to be faster this time around. Again, still not using tire blankets, so we'll have to get everything up to temperature. And lowering the ride height now means that we have to be doubly careful about this, because we will be bottoming on cold tires. As you can see, bottoming and some porpoising because the ride height is now too low, but we've got to work these tires to get them up. But they are the Ultra Softs, which means they will come in fairly quickly. But you really got to work on it. We're bottoming so much that we're actually turning in and not much is happening. We got to get the pressures up. This is something that Race Sim Studio warned you about, which is why they recommend the tire blankets. So absolutely use them if you are not confident in bringing your tires in. Wherever the tire pressures are coming up, I'm going to take a second warm-up just to make sure that everything really is happy. And you see the porpoising has started to diminish as the tire pressures increase, and therefore our ride height comes up a little bit. Might still get a little bit under DRS at VMAX, around 310 clicks down hanger straight, but for the most part it feels like it has stamped itself out. Now it is into cops. Yep, flat. We couldn't turn into cops on the last lap because the tires were cold. So there's your difference. That's how critical ride height is. The tire pressures have enough difference in your ride height with the sensitivity of this car in the under tray to really make a dramatic difference in your performance. So do be mindful of that. A little bit of porpoising towards the end of hanger straight as we had anticipated. So that's our warm-up done. We're going to go to motor. We're going to go to balanced, and off we go. Beautiful. On the power. DRS. What have we got? Wind out 7th here. Easy flat through cops. DRS now. Pretty violent porpoising right at the end of the straight, but I'm willing to accept that. To the line, what is the lap time? 1:29.933. We'll go for another hot lap here. Just keep going. We still have that compliance on turn-in, though. bit of mid-corner understeer with the weight transfer. And we'll wind out 7th. Still easy flat through cops. There's 8th gear. A little bit of manual curves here. 310, 315. Half a second up on our previous best. There it is, 129.372, fastest lap of the session. And there's our fuel light on. Came on at 7 liters. Comes on with about 3 laps of fuel remaining. Really, it's supposed to be around 5, but again, your usage will vary a little bit. Looks like we're doing 2.2 liters per lap. But really what this run highlights, number one, there's a lot more pace in the car, just based on between default setup and doing very minor tweaks really, and the biggest one really just a change in tire compound. But also it highlights the fidelity of the aerodynamic modeling that's going on here. We're getting porpoising when we have cold tires, but not nearly so much when the tires are up to operating temperature and pressure. So that's very important with this car. You have a lot of sensitivity dialed in, and it's because of the fidelity and the resolution in the aerodynamics modeling that Racing Studio have done here. So it is very sensitive. It is going to be receptive to setup changes that you make, and it is going to be rewarding to you if you understand what it is that you've done. Obviously, with that porpoising situation, your setup is going to dictate how much of it you get, even if you get any at all. And again, that's something that you really need to be mindful of when you're setting this car up, because you can quite quickly take the car from something that is extremely compliant and tractable and just giving you a lot of great performance on default setup, and you can transform it into something that is almost entirely undrivable, which, again, it's something that is a stark contrast to the default setup that this car gives you, which is rock steady, and it's consistent, and it's going to give you decent race pace right off the bat. However, you can keep going, and you can keep making steps, and you can make the car harder and less compliant, and you can get more and more of these oscillations at high speed, and you can turn it into a real train wreck, which is exactly what we're about to do. Again, the next segment, this is not at all how Racing Studio recommend that you run the car. However, I want to do this to exploit just how horrible you can make this otherwise extremely tractable and well-performing car from a driver's perspective if you get the setup quite wrong. So stay tuned for that. Right, so back into the pit lane here with us. We're going to demonstrate severe porpoising, something that absolutely ruins the chassis dynamics and absolutely ruins any real meaningful pursuit of consistency or lap time here. It does need to be said at this point, though, that out of the box, completely vanilla Assetto Corsa, this is not going to work in the same way. The car has optional CSP physics included with the download when you install the car. And you must be running one of the later versions of the content shaders patch, the custom shaders patch rather, to make this work, because it is utilizing some extended, more high-fidelity physics that are available through the CSP. But when you are running the car like this, you have the potential to run into this issue. You can see I've got a pre-prepared setup here, severe porpoising. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're still going to be running ultra soft tires. We're still going to be running similar fuel load to what we just ran before. However, the heave springs here, look at what we have done. We have got our travel ranges pretty high, and we've got our bump rubbers on the front and rear into the progressive hard setup. So we have made the car a whole lot less compliant. We had some softness there before. We had the potential to accommodate more body roll and more bump absorption through the heave springs, and it really lent itself to some better handling and some all-out better performance. However, if you really want to hunker this thing down and you really want to make it as hard as a rock, this is what's going to happen. We're at the absolute minimum of ride height, just like we were before, and we did see some porpoising before. However, this time around, it's going to be a whole lot more detrimental to the performance. Again, the trade-off with the porpoising versus no porpoising, you want to run the ride height as low as possible, but when you reach a critical point in that ride height, whether it's through your setup itself or through the aerodynamic download as the downforce increases with speed, you're going to stall the floor because it's hitting the ground. You're stopping the flow through the diffuser, which means no more downforce, which means the car bounces back up under spring tension. The downforce reestablishes as the flow restarts. It hunkers back down. It hits the ground, and the cycle keeps repeating itself in that high amplitude oscillation. That's what's happening here, and this is an example of what happens when you overdo it. So, some fuel on board, and into the cockpit with us. And let's see how bad this really can become. Remember, still very cold tires here, still not using the blankets. So we needed 2 warm-up laps just to get the car to be compliant and stable again on the last run. What's it going to do on this run? Already starting to feel the porpoising in 6th gear, and then in 7th it really comes in. However, here it's not going to get much better. There we go, it's already pretty bad. Here's Cop's corner. Yep. There's that turn-in problem that we had before, but now it's even worse. Beckett's and Beckett's on cold tires. Yep, got a lift out of it. That was flat in 8th last time through. Not anymore. DRS open. 8th gear. Bounding up and down. Slamming into the ground, into stow. Just like the previous run, we're going to take a second warm-up. But you can see as we're going through the corner, the car is bouncing up and down. The front tires are leaving the ground slightly, and it's really hurting our turn-in. And it's hurting our performance all the way through the corner as well. DRS down Wellington. Tires now mostly feeling happy. And it's still okay through the low and medium speed stuff. But the moment you start to exceed 260, 270 clicks, you get this. Now's Cops. Yep. Big lift. Watch the horizon through some of these high-speed corners, and you'll just see how the car is just gripping, slipping, gripping as it's bouncing. Not at all good for keeping it on the ground, not at all good for keeping it on line, and not at all good for lap time. All right, so just as before, we're going to go into motor, we're going to go into balanced, and off we go. Watch this through turn 1. It would spit us off the road entirely if I didn't back out of it. And you can see, even though we've got the hybrid system on, we are now just barely flirting with the positive and negative on the Delta. $300 clicks. Watch this. We turn in, and there is just a delay between us turning the wheel and the front end actually responding because the front wheels are off the ground a bit. Wind it out in 7th as we did before. But there's just so much lifting now that has to happen. That corner is absolutely flat in 7th or 8th on a better setup. But here we're downshifting. We're catching the back end now because it's also unstable. And it's just hemorrhaging pace. And as our speed increases and the downforce increases, you've reached that critical angle of attack on the floor relative to the ground and the incoming airstream, and it just stalls. It hits the ground. You'll lose the flow through the diffuser, and then spring tension takes over and the car starts to bounce. Off the marks on our turn in simply because the car is bouncing. Really having to dial in a whole lot of steering angle through there and lift the throttle. Nope. It is nowhere near as compliant as it was. And when you start to give it any sort of load through the steering at all, when you're in this heavy porpoising, it's so fatiguing, it's so unsettling, it's just not what you would expect a car like this to do. If you do want to muscle through it, yeah, you can get times that are comparable, in big air quotes, to what you could do on a trimmed out qualifying setup. But you're giving away so much pace. I mean, Cops can be flat, and it's just not here. Maggots and Beckett's can be flat in 8th, and it's just not here. Look at this. So far off the mark, just by the bounces being timed just wrong. There's nothing you can do about that other than just to slow down a bit earlier. And you can see we lost 1/3 of a second in one corner because of that. Here's Cops. Not gaining that time back either. Watch this. This is flat in 8th on a better setup. Nope. Even if you get through the first element of the complex, it now spits you off further to the left than you really want to be, which means now you've got to bleed speed off to make that final left-hander. You're just giving away pace the whole time into Stowe down into 5th gear. That's a 6th gear corner in reality. And it's all down to the setup. There's a fuel light at 7 liters. Half a second down on that lap. The car is turning the racing line from a smooth open curve into more of a polygon. There's just so much more steering angle that you've got to dial in just to give it a prayer of catching up to itself. then makes you push harder on the exits of other corners where you really don't want to push it as hard, just to give it all back through the corners that should be easy flat. It's just all in all not what you want. We're out of electricity on this lap too. Because the car's hemorrhaging a little bit of speed down the straights too, the MGU is working harder, it's burning more electrical boost juice, and you lose pace that way as well. And no matter what I do, it's never going to get any better. So you can definitely see, yes, the porpoising. It looks different. It's a novelty. It's something that we really haven't experienced in Assetto Corsa or really any sim before. And it's something that's unique to these 2022 spec Formula One cars. However, it is not an advantage at all. It's very cool that it is there. It's very cool that the car is modeled well enough in terms of the aerodynamic philosophy behind it to give you this possibility. I love that we get the chance to experience this. But it is not faster. It is not a desirable characteristic of a setup. It is not at all something that helps you in pursuit of the almighty stopwatch. Therefore, your setup needs to take this into consideration. If you really want to experience porpoising, do something along the lines of what we did on a previous run, where we had just a smidge of it as we were coming down the longest straight at the highest speed and right at the end of it. It hurts you a little bit under braking, sure, but only for a fraction of a second, so it's manageable and it's tolerable there. But beyond all of that, the porpoising is really something that you're going to want to try to avoid at all costs, because it is just not good for performance. And again, you saw we ran out of electricity sooner than we normally would have done, because it's just using more resources than it really strictly needs to be doing, and it's going to hurt you on race pace. It's going to hurt you in qualifying pace, because now with these vibrations, you saw we can't get cops anymore the way that we know that we can on the default setup or in the qualifying trim that I came up with on my own. You're giving away performance through easy, fast corners when you've got this oscillation going on. And it's just not at all something that is conducive to finding the absolute zenith of the performance potential of the car. Your setups are going to differ, your preferences are going to differ, yes, but one thing that absolutely everyone needs to keep in mind when working on this car is make sure that you avoid this porpoising as much as you can, because it's not quicker, it's not better. Maybe it looks cool on a replay. I mean, look, I quite like to watch the suspension movement. I like to see the oscillations because it shows the physics working. I like that. But it's not quicker. It is not something that's going to win you races relative to other people who are not running a setup that's going to do this nearly as much. So, and again, look at the real world. The teams have tried their best to mitigate this as much as possible. We're still seeing it a little bit after 11 rounds at a World Championship, but, you know, they're going to continue to tune it out. And by 2023, I'm going to say that porpoising will be absolutely a thing of the past, and the FIA even have taken steps to try and limit it because they see it as a potential safety hazard, because it makes the cars more difficult to control and not always in predictable ways. So, again, that's what we're talking about in terms of porpoising, and it's just, it is what it is. Again, it's really cool that we have it. I'm glad that we have it, and it really shows the level of detail that you can get in this sim, and it shows the level of workmanship in the attention to detail that Race Sim Studio have shown, but it is not at all faster. It's not desirable for your setup. So now back into the pit box with us. we're going to resume on a setup that makes more sense. It's going to be another glory run. And we're just going to have some final thoughts here before we bid goodbye to FH22, at least for now. So that'll warm up our tires as before. But all in all, you can see dealing with porpoising, dealing with compliant setups, dealing with the default setup. No matter what it is that you're looking to do with this car, whether you're looking to just emulate what you see on television in terms of the performance availability, in terms of the visuals, in terms of the sounds. I haven't at all mentioned the sounds on this car, but as you've been hearing so far, the ones here on just the normal base level FH22, they are a dead ringer for the Ferrari engines this year. I honestly couldn't believe it when I first heard them. I honestly thought that perhaps they had just ripped a recording from someplace from FOM coverage, but no, these are state-of-the-art custom sounds. Of course, they're heavily based on what we hear in the real world, but custom from the ground up, as is the rest of this car. And they are just so good. And you'll hear them better in the hot laps at the end. But what we have here is just something that is versatile, yes. Again, depending on what it is you want to do, the car is going to do it for you. If you want to be fast, it'll be fast. If you want it to be absolutely terrible setup-wise, it will be absolutely terrible setup-wise. You want to experience that porpoising? Yep, it'll do that via the extended physics. But what it does better than anything else, as it has done the other iterations of Formula Hybrid over the years, it is an absolutely brilliant experience to give us mere mortals just a taste of what it must be like to pilot a current year Formula One car in anger. It is so engaging, it's so rewarding. The way that it is very tractable on the default setup, and when you start to play, you can remain in that zone of tractability as well, that zone of habitability, I suppose, if you want to call it that. The latitude that it gives you in terms of customizing your setup to suit your specific tastes, but still delivering absolute peak performance, it makes it so accessible and it makes it so enjoyable. This has been basically the only car I've driven in Assetto Corsa since it was released. And the reason for that is it's just so good. There is so much to be had here performance-wise. There's so much to be had here with the rest of the user experience visually, with the sounds as well. It's absolutely wonderful, everything about it. I wouldn't change a thing about this car at all. It's exactly what I like, and I do feel that it's pretty much exactly what a lot of you are going to like as well. It's poised, it's compliant, and it's authentic. Again, it is the only true 100% race-legal, ground-up, original design in Assetto Corsa today. Therefore, it's also making it the only truly race-legal Formula One type car available in proper sim racing today. Race Sim Studio, the only company that's going to give you that experience and that level of authenticity. That fastidious attention to detail shows through yet again on another Formula Hybrid release. Those of you who've been fans of the channel for a long time know that I have often heaped praise upon Race Sim Studio. I'm aware that it makes some people think that I'm biased, and I am biased. Why am I biased? Because it's Race Sim Studio who consistently, time and time again, give us quality. And they've done so here this time once more. Formula Hybrid 2022, what a fantastic car, what a fantastic experience. And leading off from what we opened this with, the circumstances of its gestation have been far less than ideal. And the things that some members of the team had to do to keep this project alive, the circumstances that they were faced with were absolutely some of the worst that humanity can throw at us, but they persevered, and what they've yielded is this, and it's something absolutely stupendous, resplendent, as one sim racing YouTuber once said. It's just such a joy to throw it into Backets and Beckets and know that it's going to stick, be able to get back into the power and know that you're going to have the traction and compliance. It's just everything that you want. That level of confidence that it gives you, the level of compliance that it has, just eggs you on to push it a little bit farther each time. And every time you do push it farther, it responds and it delivers. I think this is the best Formula Hybrid yet. I have long been a huge admirer of Formula Hybrid 2017, the first Race Sim Studio product and the first Formula Hybrid. But I think this one has beaten it. It's been a long time coming, but this has now retaken top spot in the Formula Hybrid pantheon for me. It has just given everything that you could ever expect from a proper, authentic 2022 Formula One experience in sim racing. And again, it's a project that very nearly did not happen. What a loss that would have been if this is the end result of all of those thousands of man-hours and all of those months of uncertainty. I don't even want to begin to hazard a guess of what Race Sim Studio might have done had everything been absolutely perfect in the development of this car. If this is what they do under extreme pressure, I absolutely cannot wait to see what these guys come up with next. And there we have it, folks. Race Sim Studio Formula Hybrid 2022. It's absolutely amazing, this car. Again, I really can't find any other word for it other than to say it's absolutely amazing. Everything about it, inside and out, the sounds, the physics, just everything that it does is exactly what you would expect a car like this to do, and it does it so well. Visually, I mean, look, we took a look in these areas in showroom. We're in game now, and you can see the textures are all still here. The geometry is all still here. Nothing has been deleted or copped out for resource management and whatnot, even though, as you can see, the resource management in terms of the graphics and physics, everything is absolutely wonderful here. But you've got all of it in game, under the natural light. It all looks so good, and it's all here, and it's so authentic, and it's just so visually pleasing in addition to being so great to drive. But there it is, Formula Hybrid 2022. We've had a good day's motoring with this, taking it through all different trim levels of setup, all the visual options that you have. We've broken the setup and made it porpoise like you cannot believe. But the car is there, and it's going to take whatever you can throw at it, because this car is so much better than you. There's no way around it. Yeah, we've gotten some pretty respectable lap times in this so far, and I'm sure more will be coming from all sorts of us out there in the sim racing content creator world, but it's so good. All of it. It's absolutely fantastic to see all of this stuff. And again, hats off. Absolutely. This is definitely one of those products that I think, just like Formula Hybrid 2017 for me anyway, years are going to go by and this car is still going to feel absolutely amazing, because that's just the level of workmanship that we've got here. For your, what is it, €4 or whatever it is that they're selling this for, you're getting so much. I can't even begin to figure how €4 is a profitable price for them to be selling this for, but that's what they're doing, and we are gladly giving them their €4, and it's amazing. Absolutely it is. To come from me in this video, hot laps, so that you can see this car from off-board as well as onboard replay angles. You can hear the sounds, the external sounds in particular, which you haven't really heard yet, and the onboard sounds without me barking all over them. But in addition, still to come from me, is going to be another feature-length review featuring Formula Hybrid 22 S. So we have the S trim of the car that we haven't even really talked about in this video. It's going to have its own separate feature-length piece to come, covering all of the ins and outs of that car as well, because that one also has some really cool surprises visually as well as with the driving. So stay tuned for the Formula Hybrid 2022 S review to come, but also right now stay tuned for the hot laps from Formula Hybrid 2022 here at Silverstone from off-board as well as on-board camera angles. So stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very much for watching my video, and thank you very much to RaceSim Studio for giving us this product, for sticking it out through some of the worst circumstances that I could ever imagine having to work through and having to live through. But you've made this happen, and in my opinion, it's become the greatest product that you have ever produced. Stay tuned for the hot laps, everyone. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.